We are following the situation at the Olia port. A fire at the warehouse is currently under investigation. Officials report minimal disruption. Look at that fire! It's huge! Get down! Get down!
On August 14, 2025, deep inside Russian territory, a single Ukrainian drone rewrote the rules of modern warfare. In the Astrakhan region, the logistics vessel Port Olia 4 had just begun unloading hundreds of Iranian-supplied Shahad drones, artillery shells, and electronic components, cargo worth more than $22 million. Protected by Buk Mim-3 and Pantsir S-1 air defense systems, and believed untouchable, the port seemed secure. But in the early hours, Ukraine's Luton 19-6 strike UAV slipped past radars, using decoy drones, and executed a precision dive into the ship's midsection. The result, a massive explosion, hundreds of Shahads destroyed, and Russia's Caspian supply chain shattered. How did a single low-cost drone breach such heavy defenses and change the strategic balance overnight? Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest reports. At 3:15 a.m. on August 14, 2025, the Russian logistics vessel Port Olia 4, a massive cargo ship of more than 13,200 tons displacement, docked at Olia port in the Astrakhan region. The location deep inside Russian territory along the Caspian shore was considered secure. The ship carried nearly $22 million worth of military cargo, hundreds of Iranian-supplied Shahad suicide drones, large-caliber artillery shells, and critical electronic components. Protected by layered defenses, including Bukmang 3 medium-range surface-to-air missile systems, 96L6 long-range surveillance radar, and coastal reconnaissance patrols, the Russians assumed that their rear logistics hub was beyond Ukrainian reach. Yet from the moment Port Olia 4 departed Bandar Abbas in Iran and began its Caspian crossing, it had been tracked. A Ukrainian strategic reconnaissance unit, operating covertly from the opposite shore, monitored every mile of the voyage. By the time cranes prepared to unload the first containers, a Ukrainian long-range strike was already in motion. The weapon selected was the Luton 19-6, a deep-penetration attack UAV carrying a 165-pound shape-charge warhead. It approached in coordination with two UJ-22 airborne decoys, positioned 650 feet ahead in an offset triangle formation. Flying at roughly 1,000 feet, the decoys radiated strong signals, drawing the attention of Russian radars and air defense crews. This was no improvised maneuver but a carefully rehearsed tactic, a decoy-led strike formation, where sacrificial drones create blind corridors for the true attacker. With each burst of signal from the decoys, the Russian 96L6 and Nebo M radars shifted their scans, temporarily exposing gaps. Luton 19-6 exploited these brief moments, diving 2 miles deeper into Russian airspace with every cycle. What appeared as random evasion was in fact the product of hundreds of prior reconnaissance flights. The three UAVs advanced together with near-perfect synchronization, pressing deep into the layered defenses of Astrakhan. At 3:40 a.m. the Russians registered the first disturbance. The second decoy's signals were abruptly jammed at the 2.4 GHz band. Ukrainian operators quickly identified the source, a Lear-3 electronic warfare complex mounted on a Kamaz truck inside the container yard east of the port. Almost simultaneously, the Nebo M radar flagged two suspicious contacts at roughly 900 to 1,000 feet altitude. A Level 2 alert was triggered, and red warning icons lit up across the command screens. Orders were immediate. Activate Pantsir S-1. Defend Olia port. Within seconds, a Pantsir battery positioned near the northern fuel depot spun its fire control radar and elevated 57 E-6 missile tubes. Sirens howled across the Astrakhan waterfront as two missiles streaked skyward. Less than 20 seconds later, both decoys exploded over the Volga, scattering flaming wreckage into the river. Russian operators sighed with relief. Too soon, they had fallen squarely into the trap. While crews recalibrated their radar systems after the decoy intercepts, Luton 19-6 executed its most critical maneuver. Just 1,500 feet south of the pier, it banked 17 degrees off its original axis, slipping through a seam in the overlapping radar fields where beams fragmented. The corridor was no wider than a few hundred feet, but it was enough to evade lock-on. This method of radar evasion, exploiting blind seams and using decoy-driven deception, was the same technique Ukraine had previously used to send UAVs over Moscow and Kazan. Now it was being employed against Russia's southern bastion on the Caspian. By 3:46 a.m. the UAV had entered its final approach corridor. Ukrainian operators confirmed. Luton and attack channel, target Port Olia 4 pier confirmed. On their screens, the vessel loomed large. Port Olia 4 was nearly 600 feet long, with reinforced multi-layer steel plating and displacement exceeding 27,500 tons. It was not only a high-value logistics ship, but also a floating arsenal. Intelligence indicated its holds contained newly delivered Shahed 136 drones from Iran. On deck alone, over 50 containers were stacked, equating to 350 to 400 operational UAVs, enough to fuel 2 weeks of continuous Russian strikes against Ukrainian infrastructure. Alongside the drones were 6 containers of electronic parts and engines, including Iranian Mado 550 and 650 propulsion units, plus 17,650 pounds of shaped explosives disguised as industrial cargo. 4 fuel tanks carried more than 5,000 gallons of aviation gasoline, while communication systems such as the Lear 3 ensured synchronized UAV operations post-unloading. To hit this vessel meant striking at the very backbone of Russia's drone war. The defenses were formidable. Buk M3 units, with their 9 S-36 radar and 9 R-31M missiles, could reach targets 40 miles away. Pantsir S-1 batteries, valued at $15 million each, were built to intercept supersonic targets within 12 miles, reacting in as little as 4 seconds. Yet despite this defensive shield, the Ukrainian UAV was now inside 9 miles, barely 4 minutes of flight from its objective. Operators ordered final adjustments, a 4-degree offset starboard, descent by 50 feet, passive guidance only. The drone skimmed just above the Caspian surface, using sea clutter and pier reflections to mask its profile. Lutun 19-6, designed in 2024 specifically for sabotage missions, was compact, 5 feet long, 7-foot wingspan, carbon composite frame, cruising at 110 mph, terminal dive speeds up to 155 mph. Its cost was modest, less than a modern civilian car. Its destructive potential, however, was immense. At 3:49 a.m., with barely 1.3 miles left, the dive began. Accelerating to 130 mph, the UAV locked on the vessel's midsection where fuel and drone containers were concentrated. The impact was instantaneous. A white flash erupted from the port side of the ship, followed by a colossal fireball more than 330 feet high. The shockwave ripped through the hull, exceeding 40 pounds per square inch, easily fracturing steel plates nearly an inch thick. The shape charge carved into 3 compartments before igniting the engineering bay. Shock code containers erupted in sympathetic detonations, producing a storm of molten fragments that shredded pier infrastructure. Cranes toppled, warehouses caught fire, and cargo trucks were hurled aside. The blast reverberated across 12 miles. Astrakhan residents believed an earthquake had struck. Within 48 seconds, the port's fire suppression systems engaged, but it was far too late. The blast zone on deck, where dozens of Shahcode drones had been stored, was already engulfed in flames. Each Shahcode 1036, weighing 440 pounds with an 88-pound warhead, ignited like rocket artillery. Secondary explosions cascaded for nearly 20 minutes. Telegram videos posted by locals showed columns of fire hundreds of meters high, UAV fragments raining down 2,000 feet away, and shockwaves pounding the city. By 4:15 a.m., Port Olia 4 was half submerged, its bow barely visible amid the inferno. For hours, Russian authorities remained silent. Only vague statements appeared on pro-Kremlin channels. Fire at Olia Port warehouse, under investigation. By midday, the Ministry of Defense reluctantly admitted material damage to a civilian facility, denying military impact. But satellite images exposed the truth. Pier 3 destroyed, structures twisted, the cargo vessel gutted. In a single night, Russia had lost more than 300 Shahed drones and their logistical backbone for Caspian transport. This was more than a strike, it was a demonstration. Pantsir S-1 and Nebo M, long advertised as impenetrable, were deceived by decoys. The Lutun 19-6, flying low at modest speeds, remained almost invisible. The Caspian defense system, once believed secure, revealed fatal vulnerabilities. Russia locked down Olia port for 72 hours, rushed reinforcements of Pantsirs and Podlet K-1 radars, and suspended Shahed shipments across the Caspian. Ukraine, at minimal cost, had delivered a blow worth tens of millions, shattering Russia's sense of rear area safety. On August 14, 2025, Astrakhan burned under the light of a single drone, rewriting the balance of modern warfare. The destruction of Port Olia 4 reverberated far beyond the Astrakhan shoreline. In military terms, it was not only a tactical victory, but also a strategic rupture in Russia's logistics chain. For Ukraine, the strike proved that the Caspian route, previously considered a safe artery for Iranian drone shipments, was now vulnerable. By eliminating a single vessel, Kiev had disrupted 2 to 3 weeks of Russia's strike capacity, delaying long-range assaults on power plants, substations, and fuel depots across central and western Ukraine. For Moscow, the event was a sobering reminder that no rear area was immune, no matter how well defended by layers of radars, missiles, and electronic warfare systems. In the aftermath, Russian crews fought desperately to contain the blaze. Fire suppression systems were overwhelmed by the chain reactions of Shahed detonations. Each container acted like a miniature ammunition depot, producing continuous blasts that toppled cranes and tore through the steel pier. Flames raged uncontrolled, igniting nearby warehouses stocked with auxiliary equipment. By dawn, rescue teams worked amid collapsing structures, and the air was filled with acrid smoke, the stench of burning composite fuselages, and aviation fuel. Astrakhan's skyline glowed with the aftermath of a single drone strike that had triggered an industrial-scale inferno. The immediate material loss was staggering. Intelligence analysis estimated at least 300 Shahed 136s and Shahed 131s destroyed. These drones, the backbone of Russia's low-cost aerial campaign, were used in saturation attacks to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. Losing such a stockpile meant a halt in operations until resupply could be arranged. Moreover, the destruction of Iranian-supplied engines and electronic components created a bottleneck in assembly lines. Without motors and guidance systems, even existing Shahed frames became useless. The 17,650 pounds of shaped explosives intended for future drone payloads detonated in the initial blast, further compounding the loss. Russia's logistics planners were forced to recalculate the entire flow of Iranian shipments into the Caspian, now under scrutiny and at risk of interdiction. From a technical standpoint, the strike highlighted the limitations of Russia's layered defense. The Buk Mem-3 and Pantsir S-1 systems, though advanced on paper, were designed to engage fast-moving cruise missiles and conventional aircraft. Against low-flying UAVs with small radar cross-sections, their performance degraded sharply. The Ukrainian use of decoys revealed how over-reliance on radar locks could be manipulated. The Pantsir crews, distracted by the UJ-22 decoys, wasted precious seconds and missiles on false targets. By the time they recalibrated, Lutin 19-6 had already penetrated the blind seam, a maneuver their systems were ill-prepared to counter. Even the Lear-3 electronic warfare unit, though able to jam one decoy, failed to disrupt the autonomous guidance of the strike drone. Strategically, the destruction of Port Olia 4 exposed a vulnerability Russia could not easily patch. Unlike frontline bases or field depots, the Caspian supply chain was a unique logistical corridor linking Iran to Russia. With sanctions tightening, maritime shipments across this inland sea had become the primary lifeline for Iranian UAV deliveries. Every container carried not only drones but also the engines, antennas, and spare parts required to sustain Russia's campaign of infrastructure bombardment. By striking in Astrakhan, Ukraine demonstrated the capacity to interdict this corridor deep inside Russian territory, far from the battlefield. It forced Moscow to consider costly alternatives, rerouting shipments over land through the Caucasus, a longer and more exposed journey, or attempting to disguise deliveries through civilian shipping routes, which increased the risk of intelligence exposure. The psychological impact was equally severe. For the Russian public, accustomed to believing that the Caspian coast was a secure rear area, the sudden explosions shattered that illusion. Residents of Astrakhan described shockwaves rattling windows across the city, some comparing the blast to an earthquake. Telegram channels were flooded with images of towering flames, fragments of drones raining down on rooftops, and warehouses collapsing in fire. Even though state media attempted to downplay the event as an accidental fire, commercial satellite imagery circulating online revealed the full extent. A cargo vessel gutted, piers twisted, and vast sections of port infrastructure blackened. The credibility gap widened between official narratives and visible evidence. On the Ukrainian side, the operation underscored the evolution of asymmetric warfare. The Lutin 19-6, a UAV costing less than a civilian sedan, had destroyed equipment worth tens of millions of dollars. This ratio exemplified the economics of drone warfare, where low-cost platforms could neutralize high-value assets. For Kiev, it was a validation of its doctrine. Precision strikes against logistics nodes could achieve strategic effects equal to or greater than traditional battlefield victories. Every Shahed destroyed on the Caspian shore was one less drone raining down on Ukrainian power grids. Russian military leadership responded with urgency. Within 72 hours, Olia port was locked down, civilian and military docking suspended. Additional Pantsir S-1 batteries were rushed in, supplemented by Podlet K-1 low-altitude radars designed specifically to track UAVs. Naval patrols were increased along the Volga Delta, yet these measures revealed more than they resolved. Defensive saturation came at a cost. Each Pantsir unit was expensive to operate, and radar coverage could only be stretched so far. The simple truth remained. One Lut 19-6 had already slipped through. The precedent could not be erased. Internationally, the strike resonated as a case study in modern drone warfare. Military analysts observed that Ukraine had combined reconnaissance, deception, and precision strike in a single operation. The decoy-led penetration tactic, long theorized in doctrine, had been executed flawlessly in combat conditions. It showed that even high-end air defense networks could be cracked with careful planning, patience, and low-cost assets. For NATO observers, it validated investments in counter-drone technologies. For Iran, it raised questions about the vulnerability of its supply routes and the survivability of its export supported systems once integrated into Russian operations. By late August, Russian resupply via the Caspian remained disrupted. Replacement drones had to be shipped piecemeal, slowing Moscow's aerial strike tempo. Ukrainian power stations, though still under threat, reported fewer massed assaults. Kyiv capitalized on the pause to reinforce energy grids, disperse fuel storage, and strengthen mobile air defenses. The strategic breathing space, bought by a single UAV, was invaluable. It allowed Ukraine to absorb fewer losses, conserve missile stocks, and focus on rebuilding combat power for the coming months. In retrospect, the Port Olia 4 strike was not merely a tactical raid. It was a demonstration of the shifting balance in warfare, how small, intelligent, and expendable platforms could dismantle costly, entrenched systems. It revealed the fragility of logistics chains that stretched across borders and seas. And it showed that in the age of drones, no rear area was beyond reach. Astrakhan's night sky bore witness to that transformation, an industrial blaze ignited by a lone machine, rewriting the rules of deep strike warfare in the 21st century.